is also the lead at DEP about approving the plan and what happens with the plan. Because was funded by HCSRF, it's also managed in that program, so.
So then are you saying that DEP with eyes open is suggesting we agree to a lesser scope, understanding that you're gonna come to us later and say we need more, but DEP's gonna fund it?
No. What I'm saying is what we proposed a budget that, and certain number of samples, et cetera, consistent with the guidance document. And we talked about it with the DEP and some of the details of the scope. And their thought, which is also my thought, is that whether the concentrations show that there's an issue, or whether it be, it's not going to be a big issue, because there's not a big issue already. If there's a small issue or no issue, the result is just going to be monitored to make sure the condition doesn't get any worse. That's what they said to me, right? They said this is what's going to come out of this, is going to be monitored. And I agree, because I think that is what will come out of it. You have a long-term monitoring plan as part of your closure afterwards, to make sure that nothing else comes out of the landfill and gets, affects the weather area. So they felt it was appropriate to reduce the investigative scope, try to make it easier to get to the finish line here. And their suggestion would minimize reduce the number of samples and reduce the amount of work that we are proposing to do.
Wasn't part of the reduction also something to the effect of the elevations that we're going to use from previous surveys that were done there from years back, that they would still be consistent?
We did find the original survey. I think Frailinger's scope was reduced as well for that, so that is also one of the factors. We did reduce both the ecological and the surveying work associated with it. That's where most of the reduction comes from. But it was a DEP suggestion, as opposed to
what I understand of it
funding one.
is DEP and Pinelands they go together. So,
I wish they were.
okay, so what the DEP's, what they're saying is Pinelands okay with that? That's my big
Well,
question.
yeah, so Pinelands has now said, I won't say finally, but they contacted the DEP to discuss the situation
Okay,
here
so
with
they
the ecological. And they said, well, as long as the DEP says that the ecological investigation is okay, and not a big risk, then we'll be okay with it. So
Okay.
that's why we went to the Pinelands, put our proposals together, presented it to council back in April of last year. We discussed it and got to where we are and how much can we fund it. And so all this kind of happened over the past year or so in a couple different discussions. From the original discussion with Councilmember George and the mayor, with Ed from the Finance Commission. This is where we are.
So with this proposal that you gave us, we're still looking at what a time frame?
Yeah, it's probably about a 90 to 120 days to implement the work and get the data back and prepare the reports and the submittals. Right? So we're talking about, and then that goes into the Finance Commission, and I don't know. I'm hoping it doesn't take them a long time. It would go into both Finance Commission and the DEP, because I think Finance is going to defer to the DEP in this case. That was why I said I wish they did that. Had they deferred 10 years ago, we'd be done back then with the approval that we got. So
We would have had that landfill closed long ago because we're doing things, the requirements that the DEP has said that we have to do, we're way past that.
well, yeah.
We're way past that. I mean,
well,
we fulfilled the requirements of the DEP. Now the Pinelands just wants to see if blue jays have been mating with cardinals, and if lizards have been mating with frogs. It's like, this is their mentality.
Yeah.
They're not, it's absurd.
Yeah, there have been some changes to the process of the rules, but yeah.
I think the real terminology is they want to see if there's been any type of mutations that have been occurring out there.
They want to see if there's any impact to the environmentally sensitive natural resource. That's the official name for it.
Mr. Dye, back, you were kind enough to give us, back in January, a very big chunk of time. And we spoke with, also, I think, the gentleman from Finance.
Edwin Bresky, yes, right, that's what I forgot about that, yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Lafferty, that's true, yes.
And as I exited that meeting, I took it as phase one is essentially the ecological evaluation, and then the coordinator prepares a recommendation for the Finance Commission director, and then that ultimately hopefully leads to a waiver of the permeable cap.
Correct. Which is what we already proposed in this.
And then there's the phase two, which is what Council President Owen was referring to, which is the dual track, which is the Finance Commission and DEP, ultimately resulting in hopefully a public development approval and then a landfill closure approval and post-closure monitoring plan approval. Is that correct? We're still on, that's what we're talking
We're
about.
on the
right?
same track, yes, yes.
And your proposal includes the work, taking it all the way through to those hopeful final approvals?
Correct.
It doesn't include the post-closure monitoring,
It does not, because that's developed in the plan.
and that's probably gonna be a 30-year monitoring.
Yes. So 30 years, they would issue, the DEP would issue permits for the site, and again, there's waste there, there'll always be waste there, but it's, while we're all still there. And so there's inspections to make sure that nobody dug anything up, physical inspections, and there's going to be some groundwater monitoring over time, as well as part of the permits that we issue.
So what we discussed in January, is that still the plan?
Same tracks.
So, it's a known fact that there's always methane that's produced at a landfill, and we have methane vents that are there to capture some of these gases and release it, correct?
Yeah. We went through a whole thing about that because way back, long before we were involved in 2003 or 4 and 7. No, we got involved in 7, but back in 2003 or 4, Remington and Burnick had applied for an air permit and obtained one. And because they issued a permit, they were looking for some monitoring, et cetera. There was really never anything issued. Part of an investigation of a landfill is obviously evaluation of landfill gas. That was done as part of our investigation. So we took that data and presented it to the air folks who were looking for their air permit reports that were never created. We didn't even know it was there.
So,
I think Judd actually was able to find
in
it
layman's
somewhere.
terms, Jeff, in layman's
Yes.
terms, this proposal here takes us to the finish line?
This proposal should get us to the finish line, as, you know, the only thing is if we find something completely unexpected that we've never seen before, when we're doing the ecological evaluation, I do not expect that, there's no indication of that. This should get us approved from an ecological perspective, and then the steps we have after that are pretty well prescriptive.
Is it my understanding that the DEP is actually in fact already signed off on this?
The DEP approved the remedial action work plan, which is one of the tracks. There's 3 tracks actually. The DEP has 2 tracks because we're an HCSRF. We have to comply. We have to comply with the site remediation program rules, and because the landfill also has to meet the solid waste rules. So the remedial action work plan, and RAO and RAR is the track within site remediation, and landfill closure plan and approval is solid waste path, so.
Does council have any other questions? Randy, based upon the meeting that we had that time with the 4 of us, what is your opinion, or do you think this is something where we should move forward to, are you satisfied with all of the terms and conditions of the contract and, where this takes us to?
Well, I'm not qualified to judge the cost value of the contract. I mean, that's something I'm not equipped to do. I can tell you that the meeting that we had back in January was extremely informative, and I think that Mr. Dye's conduct demonstrated a high level of proficiency in this area. And it seemed to be that his plan was consistent with what the Pinelands was looking for. So, I mean, that's what I can say. I don't know, again, value I can't judge.
Well, I'm of the opinion, I think we should move this forward.
This is a public presentation, we're gonna open to the public for questions?
He's presenting a public presentation. It's the governing body that has to make a decision as to what we're doing here. If we move this forward with a contract, or if we just decide that we're gonna sit on it indefinitely, I mean, we're at the finish line. We are at the finish line. There's not much more that we could really do with this other than, pull the trigger and do the finalization of it, in which then we're gonna wait for the report from the Pinelands as to, what they have to say, and they'll just simply sign it off, or they're gonna say, there may be some additional work that needs to be done. But with the conversation that I had with Ed Rengrowski, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, and, Jeff, but my recollection was that he said Estell Manor has literally been bending over backwards to comply. We have been somewhat of a poster child of landfills to come into compliance. And the Pinelands Commission has been very supportive of our efforts of what we've been doing, and we have been very forthcoming with them. So they are happy with what we have been doing. And I think one thing that they would really love is for this to be over, so that they can move on to other seriously contaminated sites within the Pinelands region. But we're right at the finish line. We have to do something. We can't just simply hold this indefinitely.
Mr. Wengrowski did say that Estell Manor has been a very good partner with the Pinelands Commission regarding this project.
I motion we open to the public for questions of Mr. Dye.
Second.
I don't think that's a good idea, but
I personally would like to hear Mr. Pogue's opinion on it, because he's been there through a lot of it. And I wasn't here through this. I would just like to hear somebody that's been down this road, just for an opinion.
okay, well, what I would like you all to focus on is, we have professionals,
I get you.
people that are certified, have gone to college, have studied this for many, many years,
I got that too.
including from the Pinelands Commission, and those are the experts, not people that are just biased or slanted towards not wanting to get this done.
But I believe there's, not that this experts were here, but the last time they were experts, and we're in this predicament that we're in right now. And we had experts back then.
I don't know what you're speaking of.
I'm speaking of why are we still waiting on this? Why wasn't it done, like when these wells were red and they were bad reports, weren't they experts too?
Those bad reports were actually inadvertent reports where there was some confusion with the wells that were mislabeled.
By experts.
So it was bad reporting, I mean, we're here because it was bad reporting in the past.
But
We
that's
did
all-
this wrong once, that's why we're here now, right?
No, that's been resolved, Mr.
That was
Douglas.
long before our time,
I understand, I didn't say you did it.
but it didn't have.
I'm
any-
just saying,
we had
that's
any-
why we're still here, because I was at the meeting with Dombrowski too, when it was just the four of us,
Right.
in February of 2020. And we're here because it was done wrong once. I didn't say you did it wrong. It was done wrong once.
I don't think that's why we're here, but okay.
Well, that's what the Pinelands letter says.
There was some mislabeling
The
of
DEP letter
wells.
said.
They got the well numbers mixed up.
But they didn't give
It
us
could be
credit
they
for
were
some
just
of the
drunk
time.
that morning, but the reporting was still bad at the
Right.
time.
I'm sorry, what was that first
It
one?
could be they were just drunk that morning, but the reporting was still bad at the time.
I don't know who was drinking or who wasn't drinking back then when that report was done, but, you know.
Mayor, you're carrying this, it's become, who you gonna believe, me or your lying eyes? Can we hear any public questions, so that we're as informed as we can be before we decide to spend this $87,000 that could lead to us spending more money?
Sure.
May we see if the public has
Sure.
questions?
Sure.
There's a motion and a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Who has-
Mr. Pogue,
Mr.
Mr.
Pogue.
Pogue.
It's your time.
Thank you. You had a meeting from February of 2020 that wasn't necessarily as fully disclosed at the time as one might have preferred. But over the years, the various people who have been associated with the project, there has been some divergence between what is said or what is represented that others, particularly at the Pinelands, have said. And that may be simply a matter of interpretation. I'm not saying there's any malice or anything in any of that. But then when you look at what Pinelands actually says in writing, and I'm sure Mr. Lafferty will tell you, it is what is in writing that ultimately decides things. That becomes a whole different story. I can be very hopeful that there is no plume. The plume is not moving, everything's in great shape, nothing is down gradient, and everything will be wonderful, and we're fine just throwing some dirt on it and be done with it. And if there is no redevelopment, we're all happy anyway because it's done. On the other hand, we all have well water. And we only get one shot at that. If we ever had to establish an MUA to have municipal water, forget about this city, it is done. But not even going to that point. Just the fact that the ecological evaluation letter from the Pinelands that spelled out specifically what needed to be done. And what I'm hearing, and maybe I am mistaken, but it sounds as though the scope of work has been adjusted to have DEP fund some of that, which is great if that is how that goes. But it's like if we turn around and say, hey, we're going to redo 9th Avenue, and the state will pay for the part from Tuckahoe to Cape May, but they won't pay for the rest, ever. If you're going to get it done, it has to be paid somehow.
Well, I think
And
we
so-
recognize that, I think we realize that as the body. What do you see as, if I may, what do you see, given Mr. Dye's presentation, what we understand about all this, what do you see as tangible risk or practical danger in moving forward with the study?
That you're going to turn around and get told that you did not in fact complete the scope of work that the Pinelands had said in writing was supposed to be done ecological evaluation. And so whether it is 4 months or November 9th or some other time, then we wind up getting told later, oh yes, there is still more to do.
Okay, but how do we mitigate that risk tonight? Is there some other way to do it that that carries less risk than this way of doing it?
Well, I think two different paths. One is to ask Pinelands for a written clarification. If there's been representations from staff, verbally, that they are willing to accept less than what there was in that letter from February or March of last year, then everyone can operate on that scope. And then you know that. Versus you've gone through 4 months or however long between getting the work done and then it going to Pinelands, and then Pinelands comes back and says sometime around Thanksgiving, oh, more will need to be done.
Well,
And then, you know, I'm saying, that should be a relatively simple thing. The other would be, you have, if in fact that has not changed, then from Pinelands, you have a scope of work that could be turned into an RFP.
but I
Which
think
are
we
the
run
two-
that risk with,
But those are the two things of where you are tonight,
Mr. Dilge, if I may say,
versus just go ahead regardless of the cost, when months ago it was, these people ought to be sued. And the same person who was saying go forward at all costs,
No.
tonight, was just a few months ago, it wasn't that long ago,
because there was some
saying they ought to be sued out of their
misinformation that was
pants.
sent.
there was
Misinformation that
a bit of a
was
misunderstanding at that time. I have
sent.
gone
Gross
from,
misunderstanding.
this is, you're suggesting we should retain the Fox to investigate the murder at the hen house, to now it's more like, we're still inviting the Fox into the hen house, we're just hoping that we'll get a better outcome than that. I too was predisposed towards a predecessor of our current landfill engineering firm had contributed to the poor reporting of prior years. In fact, it was a totally unrelated firm, correct? It was not Mr. Dye's firm or his predecessor firm. It was someone prior to that, as I think you know, correct? Given the timeline?
Honestly, I'm not as sure, but we're being a little bit too opaque for me right now, but that's okay.
But absent that finding, absent that conclusion, if I may speak frankly, forgive me, Mr. Dye.
Go ahead.
I know of nothing that's occurred on in Mr. Dye's tenure that would have me question his ability or his, I don't want to use the word integrity, but there I've said it, moving forward. I don't have any reason to question any of that.
I'm sorry, Councilman Lizzo, and I'm not questioning Mr. Dye's integrity. That's not the issue. The issue is, council received a letter back in 2020 saying, here is the scope of work that needs to be done for that ecological evaluation. That's not a presentation by any professional engineering firm looking to do work. It is simply Pineland saying, here is what we want to see. There is now an interpretation of various discussions saying, oh, that work can be reduced. Finding out from Pinelands what their current stance is, which hopefully shouldn't take that long, would be very helpful in making an informed decision on what you're going forward with, as opposed to...
Can I say something?
I think-
Hold on, guys, hold on.
It's okay, Joe, go ahead.
There's something that I'm gonna say. This contract, Mr. Day, is this, Mr. Dye, I'm sorry, is this basically what the Pinelands has required for us to do? This is the conversation that I thought that I was a part of at the time. They gave us a list of some kind of criteria. You put this contract together, and we're gonna go with what their recommendations are, and you put it together into a contract form, correct?
The Pinelands, in their letter, says that they want an ecological evaluation done consistent with the NJDEP's ecological guidance document. That's all they said about the scope of work for the ecological investigation. They have 20 other points in there about prior work and the data and all the other stuff. That's where some of the confusion came in. So we put a scope of work together consistent with the ecological guidance document the DEP has, and the site-specific information we have, what else needs to happen to do the proper evaluation consistent with the DEP's guidance. That was the original proposal, okay? That was $125,000. Again, the survey was a big chunk of that, I'd forgotten that, you mentioned that. So, and then we also reduced some of the scope in the ecological evaluation after going to, it wasn't me, it was our ecological expert that is part of our team. And, you know, he said, yeah, we can probably get away with lesser samples here because there's not that big of a problem, and these samples should document and evaluate the ecological condition. So,
But some of the terms that are in this here is basically what the Pinelands has said that they're
No,
gonna need to have
yes,
from us.
yes.
And able to-
I
and
believe
able
the
to get
scope
to
of
the
work,
finish
I
line.
believe the scope of work will satisfy the Pinelands. That's,
Okay, that, Mr. Dilge, I think that pretty much
I
spells it
can't
out.
guarantee it, but because the reason we've been here for 10 years is because the Pinelands have been moving the goalposts on us for 10 years.
And with respect, there is a massive difference, and I think Mr. Dye would agree with this 100%. There is a massive difference in dealing with DEP. After all, if we weren't Perth Amboy, they'd be giving us a gold medal. Not picking on Perth Amboy, but they've got a lot of different brownfield sites up there. The thing is, we're in the Pinelands. That has been the problem from the beginning. It isn't a question of meeting DEP criteria. It is a question of satisfying Pinelands. And if Pinelands is truly modifying their whole scope that they gave you, then that's one thing. If that's a hopeful interpretation, and then it's adjusted based on DEP saying, we would like to fund more projects of less money, and therefore we will fund this, but this may not be that the Pinelands is talking about. Those are two different scopes.
I have a question.
Not that
So,
possibly.
when we,
Well,
I
that's,
when we first spoke, months ago, and you made the presentation, I did bring up getting a letter from Pinelands saying, sort of like to guarantee us, you know, to make us feel better about spending that money moving forward. And you said that they won't give you a letter saying if you do X, Y, and Z, you're at the finish line and you're done, because they have to see how it goes through.
Mhm.
So that's,
I still, yeah, they're not gonna give you that, if you do this, you're done.
but the,
You're right, you can ask them for a letter.
the proposal that you've put together is on their requirements, what they want, and then DEP saying that, okay, we don't need to do all that, let's do a little bit less.
Probably.
That's correct.
Okay.
They said they want us to follow the DEP guidance.
Okay.
So we went with the DEP. That's what the findings says. All they say about the scope is an ecological evaluation consistent with DEP guidance. So,
And this does.
yes.
I make a motion, we close the public.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
May I
just-
say something? I mean, the,
I have one more thing that's not totally separate. I just want to get this so I don't forget.
guy,
My proposal does not include RCC assisting with the HDS or F application. That was in my email.
that was
That's a
separate.
separate proposal.
That's already voted on.
$2,700.
That was already
Yeah,
approved.
we've already.
Okay, good.
So,
Just, I didn't bring it up.
I have another question though, as it
So-
relates to progress. Go ahead, Mr. Lafferty.
so in support of what Mr. Dye is saying, you are never going to get a governmental agency to tell you if you do A, B, C, and D, you're golden. They just, what they say is go review our guidelines, and our regulations. And, you know, what Mr. Dye's done is, he's gotten Pinelands to at least verbally agree to coordinate with DEP in that regard. And hopefully they stick by it, Creed, but you have no guarantee with, and they're never gonna say,
And I'm sorry,
They're
I'm
never
not suggesting
going
that.
The meeting's closed to the public.
but they're never
He
going to
was asking me
say,
a question.
this is, if you do this, this is your reward. You hope that they stick by their word, and you hope the talking engineer to engineer has an impact. But there's no guarantee that that's gonna happen when it gets to the regulators. But you hope it sticks.
I have a question about progress reporting. I mean, what would really wrangle me would be, we get 4 months down the road and you come to us and say, well, it's been 120 days. Truth is, you're screwed.
We don't wanna hear that.
We don't want that.
No, that's not good.
So how about progress report?
Sure. Happy to do that. It'll take 2-3 weeks to get on the schedule after the contract's initiated, then we can give you the schedule. Once any samples are collected, that takes 30 days, 20.
How about a written progress report by the first of every month so the council can consider it at the next meeting?
It's not in my scope of work, but
But you like us that well.
I've already been to 7 meetings, I'm counting. I don't like you though. I do like, listen, I have an emotional investment in this project because we've been at it for such a long time. And they have been putting the screws to the city here and moving the goalposts, as I said. So I do want to get this project finished, and I will give you progress reports.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea how long it takes to process the HDSRF grant application?
Yeah, they're annual budgets that they have. We'll submit now, the money for 2021 may already all be allocated.
That's a reasonable question.
But it's a reimbursement grant, so, they.
Oh, it's a
Oh,
reimbursement?
yeah, we do all the work and they can give it to you next
So
year.
they want to see the canceled check?
Yes. Yeah. They pay on, depending on which scope we're in, this is investigative. The investigative, they actually pay, they usually pay up front when the grant closes. But we could implement the work this year and they could provide, close the grant, in next year and still provide the funding.
But for some of it, it's for 46,000 we already spent, so
Yeah.
they could cut the check any day.
Well, I'm just saying, but they have this particular category of grant is, again, there's the $10 million, right? So how much of that is already allocated for this year? I'm not sure if there's any 2021 money left. We might have to get 2022 money.
This is partially.
Yes.
And my question is when you said that the Pinelands was in agreement with the DEP, was that, did they see something like the DEP had up and then DEP dropped the scopes? Or like, is the Pinelands aware that the scopes have been lessened?
I don't think the Pinelands is aware of any of our scope back and forth, okay? What the Pinelands said is and if I said agreed, that's probably wasn't the right word. They've deferred to the DEP's guidance document, okay?
And when was that, like,
That's in the memo, which is attached to the proposal. The memo Mr. Creed refers to is attached to that proposal. You all have a copy of it. They said that as long as we can do an eco